Alright folks, so what we have here is a Xiegu G90. It is a high frequency ham radio. It comes with this power cord that's quite bad. It uses what's called a Tamiya, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, connector. The wire was really light gauge, which is probably appropriate seeing how this is only a 20 watt radio. But it was just really cheaply made. I did put an Anderson power pole on one end, and I did that so I could plug it into my Bioenno batteries or my current power configurations that I use for other radios. Anyhow, here is the front of the radio. You can get a quick glance. But what we're concerned about is this connector on the back. And it's like Xiegu used the worst connector that they could have found. So anyhow, given the characteristics of this Tamiya connector and the quality of the cable that came with the radio, I wanted to put together a more robust solution. So I was able to pick up some Tamiya pre-wired adapters. Now these adapters actually came wired in the opposite direction of what Xiegu does. The polarity was reversed as well as the pins inside the actual adapter housing. So I had to use the tool to reverse the pin setup and the polarity of the wires. And that was a little bit of a hassle, but what I did is I put together this pigtail that I can now leave plugged into the radio, and that lessens the risk that I may damage the adapter on the radio housing itself. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make an extension cable that uses one of these Palomar Engineering snap-on ferrite beads. I put one on the original power cord that came with the radio, and they actually recommend that this is something you do. The use of the ferrite bead helps to reduce the possibility of radio frequency interference or RFI getting back into the radio and distorting your signal. Now I was able to pick up this power cable, and it is actually not for ham radio. Maybe it is. It has some I-ring connectors on it. It's 12 gauge aluminum wire, which isn't the best. And it has a 12 volt cigarette port adapter. We're just going to cut these I-rings off because we don't need them. And we're going to put a power pole on this end. We're also going to cut off the cigarette adapter and put power poles there. And I'll just use that adapter for a different project or something else that I'm working on. Anyhow, let's take a look at this cable. It has an inline fuse, which is actually rated at 25 watts. So I'm going to have to take that out and put a 5-watt fuse in. That is what was in the cable that shipped with the actual radio. As you can see, this cable is more robust than the one that came with the radio. In prepping this for the installation of an Anderson power pole, I want to put some shrink wrap on this cable down by the fuse housing. And I want to do this so I can hold the two wires together, but I also want to give it some added rigidity, if rigidity is a word. So I'm going to put about an inch and a half of adhesive lined heat shrink onto this wire. The other thing that I like to do is I like to put a housing or a boot that goes over the Anderson power poles to protect them a little bit and then also give it some added durability. So let's go ahead and add one of those. Oops, almost forgot. We're going to need some Anderson power poles. And I try to get them from PowerWorks so I know that they're not knockoffs and they're legitimate. The reason you do that is because they have a higher usage count. I think it's 10,000. I don't know what it is, but they last longer. And here is the rubber boot that I typically use when I install power poles. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put another piece of heat shrink on here because I'm going to use that up towards the end of the wires where we actually put the power pole adapters on. So let me get another piece, and I think I'm going to use black this time. It's what I typically use at the plug end. I don't know why, I just do it. Okay, now we're done with that part. The next step is going to be stripping these wires, and it's a little difficult to do with the camera in between me and the cable, but we're going to make it work. These are not the best wire crimpers, strippers, but they work. I don't like them that much though, so if anybody has a recommendation as to what a better crimper or stripper would be, go ahead and post it below. I'd love to hear your comments. And as you can see, I had to wrangle this cable a little bit to get the insulation off, but we managed to accomplish the task. Once I strip the wire, I usually twist the ends a little bit to make installation easier. When you install these power poles, I always put the red terminal on the left-hand side with the connector down. And I do that so all of my connections are universal and they can connect together. So let me get some out for this particular cable. Paying attention to the direction, I go ahead and I put this terminal onto the cable. And then I'm going to use a pair of Anderson power pole ratcheting crimpers to seat it. When crimping the adapter, I put what I refer to as the spoon down into the bit on the crimper, just like that. And then I go ahead and I give it a good squeeze. And I'm done. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do this again on the negative wire. I'm going to follow the exact same process that I did for the red wire. Give it a good squeeze. And we're done. Now something I like to do is add a little additional heat shrink to the terminal end of this, just to make sure that my connection is robust. It might be a little bit of overkill, but it's what I feel comfortable with. So I had to break out the heat gun, and I take a few short pieces of adhesive lined heat shrink, and I put them on the wires. Blast it for a few seconds with the heat gun, and then you can see the tubing shrink and secure the connections. The next thing we're going to do is put the housing on of the actual power poles. You want to make sure that you get the orientation correct. So the metal piece inside the housing and the spoon end of the terminal should be down. And I just go ahead and insert these. And when I do it, it typically clicks twice for me, and that's how I know it's done. It can be a little bit tough, so if you need to, you can use some needle nose pliers to push that in. But I think I got this one just fine. Let's go ahead and do it for the negative wire. Now that that's done, we're going to join these two adapters together, and we want to make sure that the left-hand side is red with the connection down. They slide together pretty easily. We're going to check it against another power pole that I did previously, and voila, it works. Knowing that it works, we're going to put the heat shrink on, and then we're going to apply the boot. So back under the heat gun. Once it's cooled off a bit, we're going to slide the boot up. And I'm not going to lie, this part's a pain in the ass. So just with a little bit of effort, a little bit of elbow grease, we get it done. And here's the finished product. We're going to go ahead and try it out one more time just to make sure that everything works. And it does. Alright, on to the next step. I also put some heat shrink down by the fuse, which you saw me apply on the cable earlier. Now, one side of this cable has that 12-volt adapter that we spoke about earlier, and I don't need it. So what I'm going to do now is cut it off, and then we're going to apply power pole connectors on this end of the cable. I'm not going to show that, because if you want to watch the installation of power poles again, you can just rewind the video. But I find a good spot here, and I break out my, I guess these are called side cutters, and go ahead and give them a squeeze. And here's the finished product. The power pole adapter is installed, and it works correctly. I also put on the ferrite bead, and I looped the wire through 2 times, and then I've applied some more heat shrink in various spots along the cable just to give it some more durability. Compared to the original power cord, it's quite an improvement from my perspective. I'm sure that somebody will have some comments around the gauge or the type of wire that I used, but any feedback is welcome. Let's go ahead and power up the radio and make sure everything works. We're going to be powering the radio with this little Bioenno battery that I picked up. Bioenno makes great batteries, by the way. I'm not sponsored by them by any means, but I do want to give them a shout out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the pigtail that I made earlier. And I'm going to leave that in the radio at all times. And then I'm going to use this extension cord, and I'm going to plug it into the battery. So everything fits together okay. Let's just make sure that we have continuity and connection. So, power on the radio. And it looks like we have some success here. I don't have an antenna hooked up, so I'm going to turn that off before I accidentally do something that might cause some damage. And that's it, folks. I'm pretty happy with the end result. If you like this video, go ahead and click the thumbs up, share, or even subscribe. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them below and I'll do my best to answer. I want to say thanks to everybody for watching. I really appreciate it.